Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through the crystal corridors of Nexus Prime, her boots clicking against the smooth floor. The space station hung in the void between star systems, a neutral ground where dozens of alien species came to talk, trade, and make peace. Today she carried the hopes of two worlds on her shoulders. The meeting room was large and bright, with windows showing the endless stars outside. Elena checked her tablet one more time. 3 months of careful planning had led to this moment. The Zephyrians and the Valdori had been fighting over mining rights in the Kepler belt for 2 years. Hundreds had died. Trade routes were blocked. Fear spread through nearby systems. Elena had seen this before. She had spent 12 years as Earth's diplomat, helping alien species solve their problems. Humans were good at this work. They understood pain, loss, and the need for peace. Other species trusted them because humans always kept their word. Chancellor Thrix entered first. The Zephyrian leader was tall and thin, with 4 arms and silver skin that shimmered under the lights. His compound eyes looked at Elena with what she had learned to read as politeness, but something felt wrong. His movements were too careful, too planned. Ambassador Vasquez, Thrix said in his clicking voice, I hope today brings the peace our peoples need. Elena smiled and shook his upper right hand. That's why we're here, Chancellor. To end the suffering and start something better. Archon Kess arrived 10 minutes later. The Valdori was completely different from Thrix. Her body was made of living crystal that changed colors with her emotions. Right now she glowed soft blue, which meant hope mixed with worry. Elena had studied Valdori culture for months to understand these signals. My friends, Kess said, her voice like wind chimes, I pray to the first light that we find wisdom today. The 3 leaders sat around a round table made of metal from both their worlds. Elena had suggested this detail. Small things mattered in diplomacy. They showed respect and understanding. Elena opened her tablet and began reading the peace agreement. The mining rights in sectors 7 through 12 will rotate every 6 months. The Zephyrians will mine for half the year, the Valdori for the other half. All profits will be shared equally after covering costs. Thrix nodded his head. This seems fair. Kess shifted to green, which meant agreement. The First Light smiles on this plan, Elena continued. Both species will share their mining technology. The Zephyrians have better digging machines. The Valdori have better ways to find rare metals. Together you can mine more while hurting the environment less. For 2 hours they went through every detail. Trade routes, safety rules, what to do if problems came up later. Elena felt good about the talks. Both sides were asking smart questions and making helpful suggestions. But she noticed that Thrix kept checking a small device on his wrist. When she asked about it, he said it was just a timekeeper. Something in his voice made her uncomfortable. During a break, Elena walked to the observation deck. She called Captain Marcus Chen on her secure communicator. Marcus commanded the human exploration ship Retribution, which was 3 days away in the next system. How are the talks going? Marcus asked. His face appeared on her screen, showing concern. Good, I think. But something feels off about Chancellor Thrix. He seems nervous. Marcus frowned. Trust your instincts, Elena. You've been doing this long enough to know when something's wrong. I know. I'm probably just being careful. We've seen too many peace talks fail because one side was lying. Better safe than sorry. The Retribution can be there in 18 hours if you need us. Elena looked out at the stars. No, I think we're fine. The Valdori really want peace, and the agreement is good for both sides. Even if Thrix has secret plans, he'd be crazy to break this deal. She didn't know how wrong she was. When the talk started again, Elena noticed more changes in Thrix's behavior. He kept touching his wrist device. His answers became shorter. Most strange of all, he started asking questions about Elena's security team and their schedules. Kess noticed too. Her crystal body turned yellow, which meant confusion and worry. Chancellor, you seem troubled. Is there something about the agreement that concerns you? Thrix's compound eyes focused on her. No, Archon. I'm simply eager to finish this business and return to my people. Elena felt a chill down her spine. In 12 years of diplomacy, she had learned to read the space between words. Thrix wasn't eager to finish the agreement. He was eager for something else. She thought about the oldest rule in the galaxy. Every species knew it, even if they didn't always say it out loud. Never betray a human. It wasn't written in any law book or treaty. It was wisdom learned through thousands of years of contact with humanity. Humans were different from other species. When they made friends, they stayed loyal no matter what happened. When they promised something, they kept that promise even if it cost them everything. Other species had learned that humans would die before breaking their word. But the rule had another side. When someone betrayed a human, the consequences were terrible. Not because humans were cruel or evil, but because they never forgot and never gave up. A species that betrayed humanity would find themselves alone in the galaxy. Other races would stop trading with them, stop talking to them, stop helping them. Eventually, their civilization would collapse from isolation. Elena had seen it happen once before early in her career. A species called the Korthax had made a peace treaty with humans, then attacked a human colony while the diplomats were still celebrating the agreement. Within 5 years, the Korthax were begging other species for basic supplies. Within 10 years, their government had fallen. Now they lived on one small world, a reminder to the galaxy of what happened when you broke trust with humanity. As the afternoon went on, Elena's worry grew stronger. She sent a message to her security chief, Commander Sarah Park. Increase patrols around the meeting room. Something doesn't feel right. Sarah's reply came back quickly. Already on it. I've had the same feeling since this morning. The final session began at sunset station time. Elena read through the completed agreement one last time. Everything looked perfect. Both sides would sign and another war would end. Another step toward peace in the galaxy. Thrick stood up. Before we sign, I have one more request. Elena looked up from the documents. Of course, Chancellor. What do you need? I would like my full delegation to witness the signing. It's important for my people to see that we achieved honorable peace. Elena nodded. That's fine. Should we move to a larger room? No need. I'll call them here. Thrix touched his wrist device 3 times. Elena heard the soft beep it made each time. She felt her heart start beating faster. That wasn't a timekeeper or a communicator. It was a signal device. She looked at Kess, whose crystal body had turned red. Danger. The Valdori had realized the same thing Elena had. Elena's hand moved slowly toward her emergency communicator. She needed to call for help. But before she could reach it, the door exploded inward. Zephyrian soldiers poured into the room, their weapons already firing. Elena dove under the table as energy bolts flew over her head. She heard Kess scream in her wind chime voice as crystal fragments scattered across the floor. Elena rolled toward the emergency button on the wall, but a soldier's boot stepped on her hand. She looked up to see Thrick standing over her, holding a weapon pointed at her head. I'm sorry, Ambassador, he said in his clicking voice, but humanity has become too powerful, too influential. It's time for other species to lead the galaxy. Elena stared at him in shock. You fool. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Thrix's compound eyes showed no emotion. I'm starting a new age, one where humans know their place. As the energy weapon charged up, Elena had one last thought. Thrix and his allies were about to learn why the oldest rule in the galaxy existed. They were about to discover what happened when you betrayed a human. The weapon fired, but Elena had already rolled away. The bolt hit the wall where her head had been. She scrambled toward the window as more shots rang out behind her. She had to survive. She had to warn the galaxy about what was coming, because Thrix had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. Elena crashed through the window in a shower of glass and metal. The emergency force field caught her just outside the station, but her body slammed hard against the invisible barrier. Pain shot through her ribs as she gasped for air in the thin atmosphere of the station's outer shell. Behind her, she could hear weapons firing and Kess screaming. The Valdori's crystal voice was getting weaker. Elena pressed her face against the force field and saw Zephyrian soldiers standing over Kess's broken body. The crystal being's light was fading from bright red to dark purple, then to nothing at all. Elena activated her emergency suit just as the force field failed. The thin layer of smart fabric covered her body and created a bubble of breathable air around her head. She had maybe 20 minutes of oxygen, 20 minutes to get help before she died in space. She pulled out her communicator and tried to reach her security team. Static filled her ears. The Zephyrians were jamming all signals from the station. She tried different frequencies, but nothing worked. Commander Park and her team were on their own. Through the station's windows, Elena could see flashes of weapon fire. Her people were fighting back, but they were outnumbered. The Zephyrians had planned this attack carefully. They knew exactly where her security team would be, and how many weapons they carried. Elena pushed herself along the station's outer hull, using handholds meant for maintenance workers. She needed to reach the communication array on the far side of Nexus Prime. From there, she could send a message that the Zephyrians couldn't block. As she moved, she thought about what Thrix had said. This wasn't just about the mining rights or the peace treaty. Other species were involved. They wanted to reduce human influence in the galaxy, but they had no idea what they were starting. Elena reached the communication array after 15 minutes of painful crawling. Her ribs were definitely broken, and blood was floating in small drops inside her helmet. She connected her communicator to the main transmitter and began sending a priority message to all human ships in the sector. This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez. Nexus Prime has been attacked by Zephyrian forces. My diplomatic team is dead or captured. This was not a random attack. This was planned betrayal. Chancellor Thrix admitted they want to reduce human influence in the galaxy. All human personnel should consider themselves at risk. I repeat, we have been betrayed. She sent the message on 3 different frequencies, then began making her way to the emergency escape pods. Her oxygen was running low, and she could feel herself getting dizzy. The first pod bay was empty. The Zephyrians had destroyed or stolen all the escape vehicles. Elena tried the second bay, then the third. Nothing. They had made sure no one could leave the station to tell other species what had happened. Elena was starting to panic when she remembered the old maintenance shuttle in Bay 7. It was so old that most people forgot it existed. She had seen it during her tour of the station 3 days ago. The Bay Chief had joked that it was only good for scrap metal. Bay 7 was dark and cold. Elena's flashlight revealed the ancient shuttle sitting in the corner like a forgotten toy. It was small, designed for one person with barely enough fuel for short trips, but it had life support and a faster-than-light communicator. Elena climbed inside and began the startup sequence. The shuttle shook and made horrible noises, but the engines came online. She sealed the bay and launched just as her emergency suit's oxygen ran out. Free of the station's gravity, Elena set course for the nearest safe system. But first she tried to contact Captain Chen and the Retribution. This time her signal got through. Marcus's face appeared on her screen, looking worried. Elena, thank God you're alive. We received your emergency message 20 minutes ago. What happened? The Zephyrians betrayed us, Marcus. This was all planned. Thrix admitted they want to reduce human influence in the galaxy. My entire team is dead. The Valdori delegation is dead. They made it look like the Valdori attacked the peace talks. Marcus's expression grew dark. How many ships did they have? I don't know. I was fighting for my life. But this isn't just the Zephyrians. Thrix said other species are involved. This is bigger than one attack. We're already moving toward your position. Eat 16 hours. Are you hurt? Elena touched her ribs and winced. Broken ribs, maybe internal bleeding. But I'll live long enough to make them pay for this. Elena, you need to know something. We've been receiving reports from other sectors. There were attacks on the human colony at New Brisbane 2 hours ago. The diplomatic mission to the Andorian homeworld went silent 3 hours ago. This isn't just about you and the peace talks. Elena felt ice in her stomach. How many attacks? At least 12 that we know of. All in the last 6 hours. All targeting human diplomats, colonies, or trade ships. Elena, this is coordinated. Someone planned this across multiple sectors. Elena stared at the screen in shock. This wasn't just about mining rights or territorial disputes. This was an attempt to remove human influence from entire regions of the galaxy. But the attackers had made a terrible mistake. Marcus, have you contacted Earth yet? Admiral Hassan is already mobilizing the fleet. But Elena, you know what this means. The oldest rule has been broken. Not by one species, but by multiple species working together. Elena nodded slowly. They have no idea what they've done. Over the next several hours, as Elena's shuttle limped toward the rendezvous point with the Retribution, more reports came in. The attacks weren't random. They were carefully planned to look like accidents or attacks by other species. The Zephyrians were spreading lies about what happened at Nexus Prime. They claimed the Valdori had betrayed the peace talks and killed the human diplomatic team. Similar lies were being spread about the other attacks. Each incident was being blamed on local conflicts or misunderstandings. The conspirators were trying to prevent other species from learning that humans had been betrayed. But their plan had a fatal flaw. They didn't understand how quickly news traveled in the modern galaxy. Independent traders, neutral observers, and automated monitoring systems had recorded parts of the attacks. The truth was already spreading through underground networks and private communication channels. Elena received a message from Captain Sarah Kim of the merchant vessel Peaceful Trader. Sarah's ship had been near New Brisbane during the attack. "Ambassador, I saw what really happened at New Brisbane. It wasn't pirates or raiders. It was a coordinated assault by hegemony forces. They destroyed the colony's communication array first, then attacked the residential areas. They wanted to make sure no one could call for help or record what happened. But my ship's sensors recorded everything. I'm sending you the data now." Elena reviewed the sensor logs and felt sick. The attack on New Brisbane had been brutal and efficient. 3,000 human colonists had died in less than 2 hours. The attackers had used hegemony weapons, but Elena recognized the tactics. They were Zephyrian battle formations. More evidence arrived over the next few hours. Sensor recordings, communication intercepts, and eyewitness accounts from survivors. The pattern became clear. At least 5 different species were involved in the conspiracy, but the Zephyrians were leading it. Elena's shuttle finally docked with the Retribution 18 hours after her escape from Nexus Prime. Captain Chen met her at the airlock with a medical team. As they carried her to the medical bay, Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. "How many ships do we have in the sector?" 12 so far, but more are coming. "Elena, you need to see something." Marcus led her to the bridge after the medical team had treated her injuries. The main screen showed a star map with dozens of red dots scattered across 3 sectors. Each red dot is a confirmed attack on human targets, Marcus explained. 37 incidents in the last 24 hours. But that's not the worst part. Look at this. The screen changed to show communication logs from various alien governments. Elena read the messages with growing anger. The Zephyrians and their allies were already spreading their version of events. They claimed humans had been aggressive and hostile. They said the attacks were defensive actions to protect innocent species from human expansion. "They're trying to turn the galaxy against us," Elena said. "Yes, but it's not working the way they planned. Look at these responses." Marcus showed her replies from dozens of other species. Most were refusing to take sides, but some were expressing concern about attacks on humans. A few were openly condemning the violence. Elena smiled despite her pain. "They're scared." "Who? The attackers?" "No, the other species. They know the rule. They remember what happens when someone betrays a human. Even the ones who don't like us know better than to support this." Marcus nodded. "The eldest sent a message 6 hours ago. They called an emergency session of the Galactic Council to discuss recent events concerning human diplomatic missions. That's the first time in 50 years that the eldest have called an emergency session." Elena felt a cold satisfaction growing in her chest. The eldest were energy beings who had watched galactic civilization develop for thousands of years. They rarely interfered in politics, but they remembered everything. They knew the history of every species, including what happened to those who betrayed humanity. "The conspirators think they can control the story," Elena said, "but they can't control history. Every species in the galaxy knows what happened to the Korthax, the Seleucid Empire, and the others who broke their vow. The message traveled faster than light through quantum communication networks, carried by independent traders, neutral observers, and automated relay stations. Within hours, the whispered truth reached the far corners of the galaxy. Humans had been betrayed. On the water world of Aquatica, Elder Flowing Current felt the disturbance in the galactic information streams. The Oceanic Confederation had traded with humans for 3 centuries. Flowing Current remembered the young human diplomat who had stayed underwater for 6 months to learn their language, even though the breathing apparatus caused her constant pain. That diplomat had negotiated the first trade agreement between their species, opening new possibilities for both worlds. Flowing Current called an emergency meeting of the Confederation Council. The message was simple. The humans have been betrayed. We must decide where we stand. Similar meetings were happening across the galaxy. On crystal worlds and gas giants, in orbital cities and underground caverns, alien leaders gathered to discuss the same terrible news. Most species had their own stories about humans, acts of loyalty, sacrifice, and friendship that went beyond normal diplomatic relations. The Vorthak hive mind, which existed as billions of insect-like beings sharing one consciousness, remembered the human medical team that had stayed during the Crimson Plague. Dr. Jennifer Walsh and her assistants had worked for 18 months to find a cure, living in isolation with the infected Vorthak. When the cure was found, Dr. Walsh and half her team were dead from exposure to the plague. But they had saved the hive mind from extinction. Now the Vorthak faced a choice. The Zephyrians had sent messages asking for their support, claiming that humans were becoming too powerful and needed to be controlled. But the hive mind remembered Dr. Walsh's sacrifice. Their decision was unanimous. Any species that attacked humans was an enemy of the Vorthak. On Harmony Station, Mediator Prime Velkoth received reports from across the galaxy. The ancient being had overseen trade disputes for 600 years. He had watched civilizations rise and fall, seen wars that lasted centuries and peace agreements that ended in betrayal. But Velkoth had never seen anything like what was happening now. Species that rarely spoke to each other were sharing information about the attacks on humans. Old enemies were putting aside their differences to discuss their response to the betrayal. The Zephyrians and their allies had expected other species to stay neutral or even support their actions. Instead, they were finding themselves increasingly isolated. Trade agreements were being canceled. Diplomatic meetings were being postponed. Ships carrying Zephyrian flags were being turned away from ports across the galaxy. Velkoth understood why. The rule about never betraying humans wasn't just about humans. It was about the foundation of galactic civilization itself. If you couldn't trust your word, if agreements meant nothing, then trade would collapse. Diplomacy would become impossible. The galaxy would return to the dark ages of constant warfare. Humans represented something precious in the galaxy: absolute reliability. When a human made a promise, other species knew that promise would be kept. When humans signed a treaty, they honored every word of it. This reliability had made them the galaxy's natural mediators and diplomats. The conspirators had attacked more than just human lives. They had attacked the very concept of trust that held galactic civilization together. On the hegemony capital world, General Zarthul read intelligence reports with growing concern. The hegemony had joined the conspiracy because they believed humans were expanding too quickly into hegemony space. But the reports showed that their attacks on human targets were not being received as defensive actions. Instead, other species were treating the hegemony as pariahs. The powerful Centauri Republic had closed its borders to all hegemony ships. The Economic Council of Tau Ceti had frozen all hegemony assets in their banking systems. Even species that had never dealt with humans were avoiding contact with hegemony representatives. Zarthul called an emergency meeting with his advisors. How long before our economy collapses? Economic Minister Carvel looked at his reports with fear in his eyes. 6 months, maybe less. Half our trade agreements have been canceled. The other half are being reviewed by our trading partners. Food shipments from agricultural worlds have stopped. Medical supplies are being redirected to other buyers. What about our allies in this operation? The Zephyrians are in worse shape than we are. Chancellor Thrix hasn't been seen in public for 3 days. There are rumors of riots on their homeworld. The other conspirators are all facing similar problems. Zarthul felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. What do our historical files say about species that have betrayed humans before? Carvel was quiet for a long moment. General, I think you should read these files yourself. The historical records were clear and terrifying. Every species that had ever broken faith with humanity had suffered the same fate. Not destruction through warfare, but complete isolation from galactic society. Other species would simply stop dealing with them. Trade would dry up. Diplomatic contacts would end. Technology transfers would halt. Within a generation, these betrayer species would find themselves alone in the galaxy, struggling to survive without the connections that made modern civilization possible. Most collapsed entirely. A few survived on single worlds, reduced to pre-spaceflight technology, serving as examples to the rest of the galaxy. The worst part was that humans rarely had to do anything to make this happen. Other species imposed the isolation themselves, afraid of being associated with treaty breakers. Meanwhile, Elena's message had reached Earth and the Colonial Council. Admiral Hassan read the intelligence reports in his office on Luna Base, feeling a familiar cold anger building in his chest. He had served in the Colonial Navy for 40 years. He had seen humans die in pointless wars, natural disasters and accidents. But this was different. This was betrayal. Hassan opened a secure channel to the fleet commanders across human space. 15 admirals appeared on his screen, their faces grim. "You've all read Ambassador Vasquez's report," Hassan said. "This was not a random attack. This was a coordinated attempt to remove human influence from 3 sectors of the galaxy. 37 confirmed attacks on human targets. Over 4,000 dead." Admiral Chen of the Pacific Fleet spoke first. "What are your orders, sir?" "We're not going to start a war," Hassan replied. "We don't need to. The galaxy is already responding to this betrayal. Our job is to make sure everyone knows exactly what happened and who was responsible." Admiral Okafor of the African Alliance nodded. "The conspiracy is already falling apart. My intelligence sources say there's panic in the Zephyrian government. 3 of their allies have already started trying to negotiate separate peace deals." "Good," Hassan said. "But we need to be careful. The galaxy is watching to see how we respond. If we act with honor and restraint, we maintain the trust that makes us valuable as mediators. If we seek revenge, we become just another aggressive species." On Harmony Station, Elena and Captain Chen arrived with a fleet of 12 human ships. They were met by Mediator Prime Velkoth and representatives from 50 different species. The ancient being's crystalline body sparkled with complex patterns that Elena had learned to read as deep concern. "Ambassador Vasquez," Velkoth said in his harmonic voice, "the galaxy mourns with humanity for your losses. We have called this gathering to learn the truth of these events." Elena stood before the assembled representatives, her ribs still aching from her escape. She had prepared a long speech about justice and consequences. But looking at the faces around her, some alien, some familiar, she decided to speak from the heart. "3 days ago I believed I was attending a peace negotiation," she began. "I trusted Chancellor Thrix of the Zephyrians. I believed he wanted to end the fighting between his people and the Valdori. I was wrong." Elena told them everything. The careful planning of the attack. Thrix's admission that multiple species wanted to reduce human influence. The coordinated attacks across 3 sectors. The attempts to make the attacks look like accidents or local conflicts. When she finished, the assembly was silent for a long moment. Then Flowing Current of the Oceanic Confederation spoke. "The humans saved our children during the Deep Currents plague. They asked for nothing in return." Elder Kes Prime of the Centauri Republic stood next. "Humans mediated our border dispute with the Tausadians. They could have favored either side for political advantage. Instead, they found a solution that helped both our peoples." One by one, representatives stood to share their own stories of human loyalty and sacrifice. Elena realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Species that rarely agreed on anything were united in their condemnation of the betrayal. The eldest, ancient energy beings who rarely spoke at council meetings, manifested their presence as shimmering lights above the assembly. "We have observed galactic civilization for 5,000 years. Their collective voice resonated through the chamber. "We have seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of entire species. But we have never seen anything like what we witness today. The betrayal of humanity is not just an attack on one species." The effects of the galactic boycott became clear within days. On Zephyr Prime, the homeworld of Chancellor Thrix's species, panic was spreading through the capital city. Food shipments from agricultural worlds had stopped completely. The orbital manufacturing stations that built their starships were running out of rare metals that could only be purchased from other species. Thrix stood in his command center, watching reports flood in from across Zephyrian space. Every allied species was abandoning them. Trade routes that had operated for centuries were being closed. Even species that had never dealt with humans were refusing to answer Zephyrian communications. "Sir," his aide clicked nervously, "the Vegan Traders Union has canceled all existing contracts. They're demanding immediate payment of outstanding debts or they'll seize our cargo ships as compensation." Thrix's compound eyes focused on the star map showing Zephyrian territory. Red symbols marked systems where their ships had been turned away from ports. Yellow symbols showed worlds where they could still trade, but only at terrible prices. Green symbols representing normal trade relationships had almost disappeared. "What about our allies in the conspiracy?" "The hegemony is facing similar problems, sir." "The Krill Collective has gone silent. We think their government has fallen. The other 3 species have sent messages requesting separate negotiations with the humans." Thrix felt fear growing in his chest. He had studied human history before planning the betrayal. He knew about the species that had broken faith with humanity in the past. But he had believed that times had changed. The galaxy was bigger now, more connected. Surely other species would be more practical about trade and politics. He had been completely wrong. The boycott wasn't being organized by any government or council. It was happening naturally, as individual species and trading companies made their own decisions. The name Zephyrian was becoming associated with betrayal and broken promises. No one wanted to risk doing business with people who couldn't be trusted. On the hegemony capital world, General Zarthul faced his own crisis. Riots had broken out in 3 major cities as food prices tripled overnight. The hegemony's economy depended on trade with dozens of other species. When that trade stopped, their whole civilization began to collapse. Zarthul's economic minister brought him the latest reports. General, our currency has lost 60% of its value in the Galactic Exchange. The agricultural cooperative is demanding payment in rare metals instead of our credits. They don't trust our money anymore. How long can we survive without outside trade? 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. After that, we'll have widespread famine and social collapse. Zarthul looked at the intelligence reports about human fleet movements. Instead of the massive military response he had expected, human ships were simply moving to defensive positions around their colonies and trade routes. They weren't attacking anyone. They didn't need to. The galaxy was punishing the betrayers more effectively than any military campaign could. Meanwhile, Elena was learning the true scope of what had been set in motion. Reports reached Harmony Station every hour, describing the collapse of the conspiracy. Captain Chen brought her the latest intelligence summary. The Krill Collective's government fell this morning, he reported. Their population blamed the leadership for joining the attacks against humans. There's civil war on their homeworld. Elena studied the reports with mixed feelings. She was glad that justice was being served, but the speed and completeness of the punishment was almost frightening. Entire civilizations were collapsing because they had broken faith with humanity. What about species that are trying to negotiate separate peace deals? 3 of the conspiracy members have sent formal apologies and offers of compensation. They're claiming they were forced to participate by Zephyrian threats. The Galactic Council is reviewing their claims. Elena nodded. They might be telling the truth. Thrick seemed confident that he had enough support to make the plan work. He probably used threats and blackmail to force some species to join. Mediator Prime Velkoth approached them with news that would change everything. Ambassador Vasquez, we have received a priority message from the eldest. They wish to share historical records that may be relevant to current events. The ancient energy beings had access to archives going back thousands of years. If they wanted to share historical information, it would be important. Elena and Captain Chen followed Velkoth to the council chamber, where the eldest manifested as pillars of light above the assembly floor. When they spoke, their voice resonated through every being present. We will share with you the true history of the rule about betraying humans. This knowledge has been hidden for 3,000 years, but recent events require its revelation. The chamber filled with holographic images showing events from long ago. Elena saw primitive human settlements on Earth, then the first contact with alien species, the development of interstellar travel, and the growth of galactic civilization. Humans were not the first species to develop the trait you call loyalty, the eldest continued. 3,000 years ago, another species called the Eternal Watchers served the same role in galactic society. They were completely trustworthy, never breaking agreements or betraying allies. The images showed a species of tall, graceful beings with silver skin and large eyes. They looked almost human, but their movements had an alien quality that marked them as something else. The Eternal Watchers were betrayed by a coalition of species who feared their growing influence. The betrayal was swift and complete, involving coordinated attacks across multiple sectors of the galaxy. Elena felt a chill as she recognized the similarity to recent events. What happened to them? The Eternal Watchers died out within a generation, not from warfare but from despair. When beings who live for absolute trust and loyalty are betrayed, they lose the will to exist. The last of their species spent their final years warning other races about the importance of keeping faith. The images showed the aftermath of the betrayal. The species responsible for attacking the Eternal Watchers faced the same isolation that was now affecting the Zephyrians and their allies. But without the Eternal Watchers to serve as mediators and peacekeepers, galactic civilization began to collapse. Wars became more common. Trade agreements broke down. Species retreated to their homeworlds and stopped trusting outsiders. The galaxy entered a dark age that lasted 500 years. Elena realized what the eldest were telling them. Humans inherited the role that the Eternal Watchers once played. Yes, when humans developed interstellar travel and began interacting with other species, they naturally took on the same responsibilities. Your species' capacity for loyalty and sacrifice made you the galaxy's peacekeepers and mediators. Captain Chen spoke up. But we're not like the Eternal Watchers. We don't give up when we're betrayed. We fight back. Exactly. That is why the current crisis will not end the same way. Humans respond to betrayal with determination, not despair. You seek justice, not revenge. This is why the galaxy trusts you, and why the betrayers have made such a terrible mistake. The eldest showed them images of human response to the current crisis. Instead of massive military attacks, human fleets were providing protection for refugee ships and humanitarian aid to worlds affected by the economic collapse of the conspiracy. The Zephyrians and their allies expected you to respond with violence. Instead, you are demonstrating why you deserve the galaxy's trust. Every action you take reinforces the rule that protects not just humanity, but the foundation of galactic civilization. Elena felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She wasn't just seeking justice for the attacks on her people. She was helping to preserve the trust that made peaceful coexistence between species possible. Over the following days, the full scope of the galactic response became clear. Species across the galaxy were making their positions known. The vast majority condemned the betrayal and supported humanity. Those few who remained neutral were careful. To avoid any appearance of supporting the conspirators, the Oceanic Confederation announced that they would provide free medical treatment to any humans injured in the attacks. The Centauri Republic offered to replace the destroyed colony ships lost at New Brisbane. Dozens of other species contributed aid, technology, or resources to help humanity recover from the betrayal. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. The Valdori, the crystal beings whose delegation had been murdered at Nexus Prime, sent a message through their quantum communication network. Archon Kess had been killed in the attack, but her successor, Archon Lightbearer, spoke for their entire species. The Valdori remember our friend Kess, who died seeking peace. We also remember every human who has helped our people over the centuries. The betrayal of humanity is a betrayal of all who seek justice and peace in the galaxy. Therefore, we propose a new alliance, not just between humans and Valdori, but between all species who value trust and honor. Let those who break faith find themselves alone, while those who keep their word stand together. Elena realized that something unprecedented was happening. The betrayal had not weakened humanity's position in the galaxy. Instead, it had created an opportunity to build something stronger than individual treaties and trade agreements. The galaxy was choosing sides, and almost everyone was choosing to stand with humanity. 6 months after the betrayal, Elena stood once again in the council chambers of Nexus Prime. The station had been rebuilt, but everything was different now. Where once there had been neutral meeting rooms for all species, now there were separate sections. One side housed the Alliance of Trust, the growing coalition of species that had supported humanity after the betrayal. The other side was nearly empty, reserved for the few species still willing to associate with the conspirators. Chancellor Thrix was not present. The former Zephyrian leader had been overthrown by his own people 2 months ago, when starvation riots reached the capital city. His replacement, Speaker Velmoth, had come to Nexus Prime to make a final plea for mercy. Elena watched through the observation window as Speaker Velmoth addressed the assembled representatives. The Zephyrian's silver skin had lost its luster, and his movements were slow and tired. His people were dying, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. Honored delegates, Velmoth clicked in his species language, I come before you not to make excuses, but to beg for the lives of my people. The actions of Chancellor Thrix were wrong. We accept responsibility for the betrayal of humanity and the murder of innocent beings, but our children are starving. Our elderly are dying without medical supplies. We ask not for forgiveness but for mercy. Allow us to purchase food and medicine for our civilians. They had no part in the conspiracy. Elena felt Captain Chen's presence beside her. Marcus had been promoted to Admiral after the crisis and now commanded the human fleet stationed at Nexus Prime. His expression was grim as he watched the Zephyrian's plea. What do you think? Marcus asked quietly. Elena considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, she would have felt sympathy for any suffering civilians, but the betrayal had changed her. She had learned that mercy without justice was just another form of weakness. Their children are starving, she said finally, but so were the children at New Brisbane, when Zephyrian weapons killed their parents. So were the human children on the research station at Kepler 7, when hegemony forces destroyed their life support systems. Marcus nodded. The Alliance vote is tomorrow. 47 species will decide whether to allow humanitarian aid to reach Zephyrian space. Elena watched as Speaker Velmoth finished his plea and left the chamber. She felt no satisfaction in his humiliation, but she felt no pity either. The Zephyrians had made their choice. Now they had to live with the consequences. The next morning, Elena took her place at the center of the council chamber. As humanity's senior representative, she had the honor of speaking first in the Alliance vote. Representatives from 47 different species filled the chamber, more than had ever gathered for a single vote in galactic history. 6 months ago, Elena began, Chancellor Thrix told me that it was time for humans to know their place in the galaxy. Today we know exactly what that place is. She gestured to the assembled delegates. We are the species that other species trust to keep their word. We are the people who stay loyal even when it costs us everything. We are the civilization that builds bridges instead of walls. But we are also the species that remembers betrayal. We are the people who understand that mercy without justice is meaningless. We are the civilization that knows the difference between forgiveness and surrender. Elena paused, looking directly at the empty seats reserved for the conspirators' allies. The Zephyrians asked for mercy for their civilians. But where was their mercy for the children of New Brisbane? Where was their compassion for the families destroyed across 3 sectors of space? The alliance of trust was not built on hatred or revenge. It was built on the simple principle that agreements must be honored, and trust must be protected. Those who break faith with their allies have no place in our civilization. The vote was unanimous. No humanitarian aid would be sent to Zephyrian space. The quarantine would continue, until the Zephyrian government formally accepted responsibility for the betrayal and agreed to pay reparations to the families of those killed in the attacks. Elena knew that Speaker Velmoth's government would never accept those terms. To do so would be to admit that their entire species was responsible for the betrayal. The Zephyrian people would rather face extinction than accept that level of shame. After the vote, Elena walked to the memorial section of the station. Here, holographic displays showed the faces and names of every human killed in the coordinated attacks. Her diplomatic team from the original peace talks, the colonists from New Brisbane, the researchers from Kepler 7, over 4,000 faces looking back at her with trust and hope. Admiral Hassan's image appeared on her personal communicator. The old man looked tired but satisfied. The vote was the right decision, he said, but I know it wasn't easy for you. Elena touched the memorial wall, her fingers passing through the holographic image of Commander Sarah Park, her security chief who had died defending the original peace talks. Admiral, do you think we've become too hard? Too unforgiving? Hassan was quiet for a moment. Elena, I've been thinking about that question for 6 months, and I keep coming back to the same answer. The galaxy trusts us because we keep our word no matter what it costs us, but they also trust us because we understand the value of that trust. When someone breaks faith with humanity, they're not just attacking us. They're attacking the foundation that makes peaceful civilization possible. If we forgive that too easily, we tell the galaxy that trust doesn't really matter. Elena nodded slowly. The Eternal Watchers died because they couldn't handle betrayal. But if we become too forgiving, we'll fail in our role as protectors of galactic trust. Exactly. The Alliance of Trust exists because 47 species believe that some things are more important than politics or profit. They believe that a civilization built on honor and loyalty is worth defending. Elena looked out through the station's windows at the ships of the Alliance fleet. Vessels from dozens of different species flew in formation, their crews working together with a unity that would have been impossible before the betrayal. The conspirators had wanted to break human influence in the galaxy. Instead, they had created something much stronger. They had forced humanity to choose between forgiveness and justice, and in making that choice, humans had proven why they deserved the galaxy's trust. 3 months later, Elena received word that the Zephyrian government had fallen completely. The remaining population had retreated to their homeworld, where they survived on subsistence farming and what little technology they could maintain without outside trade. Speaker Velmoth had sent one final message before the communication networks failed. "We underestimated humans. We thought you were weak because you chose peace over conquest. We thought you were naive because you trusted those who didn't deserve it. We were wrong about everything. But we were most wrong about this. We thought the galaxy would choose practical politics over abstract principles. Instead, every species that matters has chosen to stand with honor and loyalty over profit and power. We broke the oldest rule in the galaxy. Now we know why that rule existed. It wasn't to protect humans. It was to protect civilization itself." Elena deleted the message without responding. There was nothing left to say. A year after the betrayal, Elena stood once again in a meeting room on Nexus Prime. But this time, she was surrounded by friends and allies. The Valdori delegation glowed with soft blue light, indicating their contentment and hope. The Oceanic Confederation's representative moved gracefully in his mobility tank. The Centauri Republic's elder clicked her approval in their musical language. They were drafting the Charter of Trust, a formal agreement that would govern the Alliance and set standards for galactic civilization. The document established simple principles. Agreements must be honored, trust must be protected, and those who break faith with their allies would face isolation from the galactic community. Elena signed the charter with a pen made from metal recovered from the destroyed human colony at New Brisbane. It seemed fitting that something good should come from that tragedy. As the ceremony ended, she thought about the lessons learned over the past year. The galaxy had discovered that trust was not just a nice idea or a diplomatic convenience. It was the foundation that made trade, cooperation, and peace possible between different species. Humanity had learned something too. They had learned that their role in the galaxy was not just to be trusted, but to be worthy of that trust. Every decision they made, every action they took was watched by dozens of species who depended on human reliability and honor. The betrayers had wanted to teach humanity its place in the galaxy. In the end, they had succeeded. Humanity's place was at the center of a civilization built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. It was exactly where they belonged. Elena walked to the observation deck one last time, looking out at the Alliance fleet. Ships from 47 different species flew together in perfect formation, their crews united by something stronger than laws or treaties. They were united by trust, and in a galaxy full of different species, different cultures, and different dreams, that trust was the most powerful force of all. The oldest rule in the galaxy had been broken. Thank you for watching, and comment for next part.